So welcome to Unleashed Learning TV, the place that helps you boost student engagement and unlock consistent and effective teaching for everyone, and we do mean everyone. Now, if you and your school are truly committed to ensuring that learning sticks for everybody, and we mean everybody, we've got a really special treat for you today. Now, as you might know, inclusion is a really important key in the Unleashed Learning system, and because this key is so important, we've got a special guest in the house today. Now, Dr. Richard Villa is an internationally known expert on the development of support systems for educating all students in general education. Now, he's the author of over 25 books, more chapters and articles than I can count, and works all over the world to ensure students and all backgrounds have full access to learning. And he's agreed to stick around for a 3-part series on inclusion, differentiation, and co-teaching that we think that you and your entire school are not going to want to miss. So let's get started. So Richard, welcome to Sydney. Welcome to Unleashed Learning TV. Thanks for doing this.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, we were talking earlier and we've been interviewing people about inclusion. And what I'd like to start off with is your definition of inclusion, because I think in the profession, a lot of people have different kinds of definitions. You're going to help with that. So when you're talking about inclusion, what are you specifically referring to?
Okay. Well, the National Equity Project in the United States defines inclusion as everyone getting what they need, when they need it, in the way that they need it. My wife and colleague, Dr. Jacqueline Thousand, and I have defined inclusion for many years as the welcoming, valuing, empowering, and supporting of the diverse academic, social, emotional, communication, and language learning of all students in shared environments and shared experiences for the purpose of attaining the goals of education. It's done not because it's a nice thing to do. It's done because we believe it'll better enable people to reach the goals of education. We've had the good fortune of being able to literally ask hundreds of thousands of people, what are the goals of education? We've asked it in every US state and at least 45 other countries, and the answers are always the same. We've been able to take what people tell us, and we found years ago this conceptual framework that we borrow from the Native American culture, the Lakota in particular. The Lakotas say that the goals of the community were to create courageous children and youth, and that would be achieved if we can instill within them a sense of belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. We believe that everything we hear when we ask what are the goals fall into those 4 dimensions. When people speak about being a member of a community, feeling good about yourself, having that sense of belonging, social skills, that's about belonging. Being all that you can be, developing your competence, your mastery. We do that in different areas to different degree, but every human being must have a sense of competence and mastery. Independence gives you options in your life. It's about opportunities to continue to learn, employment, choice, where you live, work, recreate, with whom you associate. And then there's generosity, social responsibility, contributing member of society, valuing of diversity. So for us, that encompasses what inclusive education is, as well as part of the rationale as why.
It's fantastic. I love it. It reminds me why I think many of us got into the profession in the first place. I mean, those definitions speak to me for why I entered our profession. So, you know, one of the things that sometimes happens for educators is they've got so much content to get to, and they feel the pressure. And so when they hear this conversation, like, oh my gosh, I've got so much. So why is inclusion so important in this conversation? I mean, I think you mentioned that, but I've got a lot of content, but why is inclusion, why is it something we should be thinking about?
Well, if the goals of education truly are belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity, we should examine how inclusion gets us there compared to separate segregated education. And if we think of a contemporary theory of motivation, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Maslow tells us that people have to have their basic physiological needs met. They have to have safety, security concerns taken care of. And that at the heart of Maslow and every theory of human motivation is belonging. All of us need to feel that we belong, we are valued, we are part of. The next is about developing positive self-esteem, achieving, and then we might be able to become self-actualized to reach the highest level of Maslow's hierarchy. When we think about belonging, it has a close relationship to self-esteem. We're worried about children and youth who have low self-esteem because they typically make poor choices. But Maslow taught us where self-esteem comes from. It arises naturally out of a place of belonging. I am loved, I am valued, I am accepted. I develop that positive self-esteem. And then and only then might I reach my full potential. When we say to children and youth, you can't belong, maybe someday, but right now you look different, walk different, talk different, act different, you can't belong. We basically create an inversion of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And think of the painful catch-22 built into this. We are telling children and youth they can't belong until they achieve, forgetting Maslow's lesson, you can't achieve unless you belong. And belonging isn't created simply by physically placing a child in a classroom. It's tied to the climate, the culture of that classroom, the instructional practices that we do, our differentiation, our creativity, our collaboration. When we look at mastery, we have over 45 years of research and experience that has told us that children with disabilities have greater academic, social, and communication growth if they are in an inclusive setting as compared to being educated separately in segregation. This holds true for every category of disability, every age, and every level of severity, if you will. 45 years of research and experience telling us how do we get better results. When we talk about independence, I'm sure you would agree with me that employment would be a marker of independence. Many children and youth, once they've graduated from school, are unemployed. Those who have been in an inclusive environment are more likely to be employed. The U.S. Department of Education follows graduates of special ed into their adult lives, and they have concluded that there's greater quality of life, and they measure happiness, friendship, self-esteem, and employment based upon how long you have been included. So in other words, the quality of life in each of those dimensions rises in direct proportion to the amount of time you spend in gen ed. When we think about generosity, I'm reminded of a quote from Dr. King. Anybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't need to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You don't need a college education to serve. You only need a heart filled with grace and a soul generated by love. How many children and youth who struggle in schools have hearts filled with grace, souls generated by love? What they need is an opportunity to not just always be on the receiving end of help. The message we continuously give them is, you need to be helped, you need to be helped. When are they called upon to give back? So there are other rationale for inclusion beyond the attainment of those circle of courage outcomes. In many places, it's tied to policies, international agreements, as well as national laws and policies. In 2008, there were 153 nations who were present at a UNESCO conference on education. They all endorsed that human, social, and economic gains are important and we need quality, inclusive environments to achieve those human, social, and economic gains. In other places, it's tied to fiscal, because quite frankly, it has been demonstrated that an inclusive education can be cheaper. In some parts of the world, a segregated education is 3 to 5 times more costly than having that inclusive education. For many of us, the rationale that drives us is that we see this as a social justice issue. It is a civil rights, it is a human rights issue. So different people are clearly motivated by different rationale.
My last question for you, Richard, is you've got the privilege of traveling over the U.S. and also the world, and you see lots and lots of classrooms. So when you see a class that you really think is an inclusive place, what does that look like for you? When you walk and go, it's happening here, what would you say? The ones that you really go, it's happening, what would we be seeing?
Well, sometimes we see inclusive classes and sometimes we see inclusive schools because we each have different spheres of influence where we can change, directly impact what goes on. So first let me talk from a systems perspective, because we know from surveys of schools that as a school are doing a good job with inclusion, they tend to have 6 variables, if you will, in place. The first one is about visionary leadership. Someone who can articulate the vision and build consensus for that vision. And then following that, it is about professional development. People need to acquire new skills to do the jobs that we are asking them to do. And the most successful places don't just provide training in a skill, but they provide performance-based feedback, coaching, and mentoring as people learn and practice those new skills. Collaboration is essential. It is essential in planning, but it's also essential in teaching. So we have a lot of co-teaching going on in the schools that are most successful. Time is the number one incentive variable that frontline practitioners say that they need to be able to successfully do inclusion. We agree they don't have enough time, but we also believe they don't have efficient processes sometimes about how to use the time they have well. So part of that training's got to be in processes, framework, strategies to be efficient in collaboration and creativity. To me, one of the most important variables is about a refocused use of assessment. We do not need assessment that's going to tell me about this person's perceived deficits. You never need to know how smart a person is to teach them, but you do need to know how are they smart. Because if you tell me how they're smart, I can motivate, I can teach, I can relate. So what are this child's interests, talents, assets, learning styles, multiple intelligences? I need that to successfully do the sixth variable, which is about quality differentiation in curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And then to make that more specific to a classroom, it is an environment where diversity, there are things you see, there are things you feel. Mm-hmm. And you go in here and you know and you can see and witness that the diversity of the children in that room is being valued. You clearly see a fair amount of differentiation going on. And not just for children who carry particular labels. This is about good quality education for all children. You will see a lot of peer-to-peer engagement in cooperative group learning and quick cooperative structures as well, but you'll see it in peer tutoring. And sometimes you'll have co-teaching going on in these classrooms.
One of the things, we're just about out of time, but what really strikes me is you can feel it. There is the energy of how I actually feel in that space. So we're going to do 3 parts with you, so thank you for sticking around for that. But to conclude this part, we've got a question for you, and our question is this. So at your school or in your classroom, what does it look like? What do you do to ensure inclusion for all students in your classroom or school? So some of the best conversations take place in the comment section of the blog. So check that out and add to the conversation. We'll check it out. And as always, thank you for the work you're doing. We will see you in part 2, where we're going to talk about differentiation. So Richard, thank you for part 1.
You're welcome.
We'll see you in just a second.
I look forward to the next 2 segments.
Fantastic.